I would like to take you back in time with me to the summer of 2013, exactly 13 years ago. That was a period in my life when things had started to get really, really rough. I was facing probably the most painful, agonizing realization of my life. I knew my marriage was over, and I knew I needed to get a divorce. Deep in my core, I knew that staying was preventing both of us from living truthfully. But for months and months and months throughout the heavy summer, I could not find the right time to make the move. Every single week, a new, highly logical excuse would appear in my mind. Well, it's in the middle of the summer, let's wait just for the season to change. Well, the high holidays are coming up in the fall, so I can't really disrupt the family now. Right now, work is too overwhelming, and this week, let's just wait until things calm down. No, let's wait just after the bat mitzvah of the Cohens. Every time, I was about to take that step, I convinced myself that I was just being prudent, that I was just waiting for the right moment. There is never a perfect moment, especially to dismantle your life. I was making excuses because I was absolutely, totally terrified. Today, in my other professional life, I coach couples. Day after day, I sit across from individuals who are paralyzed by the exact same mechanism. They look at me and they list probably dozens perfectly rational reasons why they cannot make a decision, why they cannot set a boundary, why they cannot change their lives right now. Because I have walked this path, I don't judge them. I just understand them. We make excuses because human beings are hardwired to prefer a familiar, predictable pain over a completely unknown, unpredictable freedom. It was only years later, looking back through the lens of the Torah, that I truly understood what was happening inside my soul during that difficult summer of 2013. It is the exact same psychological phenomenon that takes place in this week's Torah portion, Parashat Shlach Lecha. Every year, as you probably do, when we read this parasha, this portion, we are presented with a predictable script. 12 leaders chosen by the elite of every tribe enter the land of Israel on a scouting mission. They stay for 40 days, they return, 10 of them bring back devastating, pessimistic report that breaks the spirit of the whole nation. 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, stand up against the tide, urging the people to move forward and trust. Traditionally, the sermon writes itself. The lesson we are taught from childhood is very simple. It's almost binary. The 10 spies were cowards and the 2 were heroes. We were told, have faith, don't be afraid, be like Joshua and Caleb. Simple. But this year, it was different for me. Through the lens of the human transition, I want to ask a different, perhaps very uncomfortable question to all of us. What if we have been a little unfair to the spies? What if instead of instantly judging them from our comfortable distance of 3,000 years, we try to understand them, just for once? After all, looking at who they were, how could they not be afraid? Imagine those 12 men. We call them spies, which evokes probably an image of elite commanders. But they weren't military generals. They were human beings who had spent the majority of their lives in Egypt. They were the children and the grandchildren of slaves. For generations, their families had lived under the crushing weight of systemic oppression. For generations, survival did not depend on bravery or strategic warfare. Survival depended on obedience. It depended on caution. It depended on keeping your head down as a slave, blending into the background, and doing exactly what you were told to survive. And now, suddenly, they are standing at the edge of a radically new future, a future filled with absolute uncertainty, a future that requires them to become someone they have never been before. And so they panicked, just like I panicked in the summer of 2013. Just like so many of us panic when standing on the principle and the precipice of a major, undeniable life shift. The Torah provides a psychological masterclass in how the panic manifests. When the spies return, they describe the fortified cities and the imposing figures they encounter, and they said something fascinating. I'm quoting from the Torah. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in their eyes. Now let's notice something together here. This is the precise order of the sentence. They do not say the giants looked at us and thought we were grasshoppers. They say, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Only then do they add, and so we were in their eyes. So the problem did not begin with external obstacles, the giants and the fortified cities. The giants were not the first barrier. The story they told themselves was. The spies were not simply reporting objective facts about the geography of Canaan or the land of Israel. They were projecting their internal reality into an external world. They were revealing how they truly saw themselves. They had left Egypt, but Egypt had not left them. They still possessed the self-perception of the helpless, the small, and the powerless. Perhaps that is exactly why this story has survived for thousands of years. It isn't an ancient military report. It is a timeless human mirror. Most of us in this room are not standing before literal fortified stone cities. We aren't facing literal giants in armor. But most of us today, in our lives, are at least standing before conversations we do not want to have. Decisions we are terrified to make. Changes we know we need, but keep postponing and postponing. A relationship that needs painful, honest healing. A dream we are too afraid to pursue because failure would hurt too much. A boundary we know we need to set, even if it disappoints someone else's. And often, just like the spies, we find highly logical, deeply rationalized reasons not to move forward. Not because we are weak, not because we are bad people, but because growth is frightening. The great Hasidic masters looked at this text and asked a profound question. They didn't ask why the spies were afraid of giants. They asked the following: why were these holy spiritual leaders so deeply resistant to entering the land of Israel? Why are they so resistant? And the answer they gave is brilliant. The Hasidic masters argued that the spies were not afraid of dying in war, in the battlefield. They were afraid of living in responsibility. Think about their life in the wilderness. Think about it together. It was spiritually beautiful. Utterly insulated paradise. Yes, they complained, they whined, like Rabbi Uri said last week. But literally, life was entirely miraculous. If they were hungry, manna will just fell from heaven. If they were thirsty, water flowed from the rock. God handled everything. It was a permanent spiritual retreat where they didn't have to grow up. But the land of Israel, entering the land, occupying the land meant the miracles would stop. In the land, if you wanted bread, you had to plant seeds, tend the soil, and harvest for wheat. If you wanted safety, you had to build walls. If you had to govern, you had to create a functional society. You had to raise children, resolve neighborly conflicts, and make difficult, messy, real-world compromises. The wilderness was a divine nursery. The land of Israel demanded that they become adults. That is why we complain about our circumstances, our jobs, our relationships, our communities, or the exhausting state of the world. But when the actual opportunity for real change arrives, something inside us violently resists. We suddenly discover a million of reasons why now is just not the right time. Excuses appear, doubts multiply, and fear takes the microphone. Not because we consciously want to stay stuck or stagnant, but because the familiar, even when the familiar is painful or frustrating, feels safer than the unknown. The spies wanted freedom from Pharaoh's Egypt, but they were paralyzed by the heavy daily responsibility that true freedom requires. We pray for change, we dream about change, we ask God for change. When change knocks the door, guess what? We realize that what we really wanted was comfort. We chicken out. The land of Israel was never just a destination. It was an invitation to become a different kind of people. And that invitation was terrifying. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov famously taught, the whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the essential thing is not fear at all. But hear this, most people hear this teaching and assume it means we are supposed to be completely fearless. We think Rabbi Nachman is telling us to suppress our anxiety. But that is a profound misunderstanding, my friends, of human psychology. The bridge is still narrow. The drop below is still deep. Fear is a natural, biological, emotional response to our narrow bridge. Rabbi Nachman wasn't saying, don't feel fear. He was saying, don't let fear make your decisions. The question for us is never whether fear exists. The real question is, who gets to drive the bus? Will fear make our choices, or will our values make our choices? Joshua and Caleb, the spies who reported positively, were not fearless superheroes. They were not Batman and Robin. They saw the exact same giants. They saw the exact same fortified walls. The difference between them and the other 10 was that they refused to let fear have the final deciding vote. They had fear. They had fear. But they also had a purpose that was bigger than their own fear. When I finally when I finally made the decision to move forward from that rough period in 2013, the fear didn't magically vanish. Believe me, it didn't. What came afterward was very difficult, very difficult. There were painful days, messy judgment, anxiety, sometimes feeling sadness and depression, and moments of deep uncertainty. The giants were real. But standing before you today, 13 years later, I can tell you with absolute certainty, it was worth it. My life changed completely. I grew into the person I was meant to be. A person I could never have become if I had stayed in that safety of that wilderness. It was a step I simply needed to take. We live, my friends, an undeniable age of anxiety. We look around our world, and there is so much to worry about. Our families, our health, the terrifying rise of anti-Semitism, the safety of Israel, and so on. Fear is totally understandable. It is deeply human. The goal of our spiritual life is not to eliminate fear, because to be fearless is to be unhuman. The goal is to prevent fear from becoming our identity. The goal is to prevent anxiety from becoming the sole lens through which we view our potential. Because when fear becomes our identity, we inevitably become grasshoppers in our own eyes. And when that happens, we convince ourselves that a better future is impossible. So this Shabbat Shlach Lecha, the question we must ask ourselves is not, where are the giants? The question must be, where do I still see myself as a grasshopper? Where am I drastically underestimating my own God-given strength? Where am I allowing old stories, old traumas, and old identities to define my current boundaries? Where am I letting fear make decisions that rightfully belong to hope, to faith, to wisdom, and to purpose? Chaverim, my friends, the true tragedy of the spies was not that they felt afraid on the border of the land. The tragedy was that they allowed their fear to write the script for their future, condemning an entire generation to wander in circles for 40 years. Joshua and Caleb show us another way, not a life of certainty, but a life of truth, of trust. Not a life of perfection, but a life of active responsibility. That is what it means to finally, truly leave Egypt behind. It is to stop allowing the memory of our chains to dictate how far we are willing to walk tomorrow. May we find the courage to acknowledge our fears, step onto the narrow bridge, and hopefully move forward into the land that awaits us. Shabbat Shalom.